we live in a world that, in which all of us are constantly surrounded by stories. In our private space, home, and certainly in our public space. The signs, the billboards, the culture around us, the storytelling, and so on. And that's the fundamental battle, is whether our stories will matter. I mean, matter. Whether our stories will shape hearts and minds in competition with all of these other stories. And if we are apologetic for being assertive, perhaps even aggressive in our storytelling from the Bible, then it is only to make ever more space for the other invasive, directive stories which are swirling around us. And we need to work with our people to help our people see that if we're not being shaped by one set of stories, it means we're being shaped by another set of stories. There is no neutral ground. There is no neutral space that we are kind of contemplatively thinking about life. No, we're just constantly bombarded. So the fundamental battle for the Bible is not the battle between liberals and fundamentalists. It is between the stories that we understand to narrate a practice and a history of salvation, of human wholeness, healing, liberation, exorcism, and all the other stories that are directing us to do this and that or the other thing, or promising us fantastic worlds, or building our self-esteem through, or distracting our attention from life as we know it toward the dramatic aspects of some fictional life, such as Neighbors. I mean, one of the reasons soap operas are so popular is because it distracts. They tell worlds just like our worlds. That is, just like our middle-class world. And they tell these stories, and these are the dramas of people's lives. But the difference is we're only told the interesting things about these people's lives. And these people are, generally speaking, more beautiful than we are. And their lives are more dramatic than ours are, as a rule. And so it distracts our attention to a slightly idealized, or perhaps a very idealized form of existence. And that takes our attention away from life as it really is. Right? So that's the battle we're in, really. Now the battle between liberals and fundamentalists, unfortunately, has deteriorated into a struggle as to whether we even use the Bible or not. With the fundamentalists and the conservatives saying, yes, we must use the Bible. And the liberals mistrusting how the conservatives interpret the Bible, saying, well, therefore, we're not as dogmatically certain as these people seem to be, so we'll concede the Bible to them. And the problem with that is that the liberals, increasingly the liberal churches find themselves without a story to tell. That is, without a story that's different from the 6 o'clock news or the soapies or the advertisements. And the conservatives actually aren't telling a story either. They think that they can compete with all the fantastic storytelling in the culture around us by giving rigid principles for how to live, extracted from the biblical stories. This notion of literalistic Bible interpretation, particularly the notion that God wrote the scriptures. What do you reckon? What do you reckon about that view of Scripture? Well, maybe it's not for sale. In any case, it certainly is out there on the market. You may not buy it, but a lot of people are. God contradicted God's self when God wrote it because there seems to be a few things that are occasionally different. But what really is this point of view on the Bible? What if it's heresy? What if it's not just kind of innocently wrong-headed, well-intentioned, but perhaps a little simplistic, right? That's how liberals tend to look down their noses at that. But what if it's downright heretical? The only greater heresy being, of course, churches who no longer read their story at all. So let's give the highest heresy to the liberals, and let's give the second highest heresy to those who say the Scripture was dictated by God. And the Scripture really is an extended form of the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. Which is the way the Bible is preached in most churches of the conservative variety. Would you agree with that? That that's how the Bible tends to be preached on the conservative end of the spectrum? Whereas on the liberal end of the spectrum, the Bible isn't much preached at all. And what if it's heresy to say God wrote the Scripture? Want to have a guess what heresy that might be? It's the most ancient heresy in the church. Well, there is a form of idolatry insofar as this becomes an icon that we don't really read, but that we worship. And there is a form of that kind of form of idolatry in conservative churches. But there's a more specific heresy that first challenged the Christian church way, way back in the 1st and 2nd centuries. Yeah, well, it was kind of a outgrowth of Gnosticism. Gnosticism, right, was a particular style of religious knowledge that said, first of all, that Christianity is all about knowing. That was the first error. It's all about knowing as opposed to doing. That was its first departure from the roots of the faith. The second departure is what we know is special and secret and magical. And by knowing it, it saves us. So if you know the right Bible verses, if you assent in your mind and in your heart to the right Bible concepts, you will be magically transformed. Sound like any religion you've heard recently? Liberals do the same thing, by the way. Just different things to assent to in one's mind and heart. That was Gnosticism. Now, Gnosticism went on to say that because this special knowledge is what saves us, and this special knowledge is secretly hidden in these books and these phrases of wisdom, what Jesus actually did wasn't important. What he said was important, what he taught was important, but what he did wasn't important. And very specifically, the Gnostics developed in their theology that Jesus' death was not only not important, it couldn't have possibly happened. Because Jesus was a divine teacher of divine knowledge who couldn't actually have suffered in the human body. Because that would make Jesus less than divine. And that was known as the docetic heresy, which grew out of Gnosticism. Docetism, a little bit of church history here. But of course it's not church history, it's church present. Because I believe that the docetic heresy is the great heresy of the modern church. That is, a church which continues to say it is not how Jesus was human that matters. It was how Jesus was divine that matters, and the divine insights that he communicated magically through his words that were magically written down in this magic book that magically saves us once we assent to it in our heart and mind.